Well, so yeah, thanks everybody for being here. I do think others will show. We have a great meeting, I think, today. This is our fourth meeting, so we really appreciate those of you that are continuing to come, and we have a speaker today, so I think we'll have a good conversation. The difference today versus the other meetings that we have had is that we've shortened ourselves back down to an hour, which I think is totally manageable and reasonable. So thanks for your feedback on that. And just to sort of remind everybody what we're doing together, the purpose of these National Tribal Resilience Data Work Group meetings is to connect all the experts around the country that we're aware of that are experts in climate or health data or tribal work in this area, to exchange knowledge on priority tribal adaptation and resilience data needs, share tools, practices, ideas, and lessons learned from the field, and explore opportunities where possible to develop and scale up solutions to address tribal resilience data needs. So I really feel like our conversations have been constructive, and particularly we're getting a lot clearer on what it is we might actually do together, like what's the point of all of us getting together in terms of us getting our heads around certain things. And so our standing meeting has sort of solidified our standing agenda. We start off with some little welcomes, and if there's anybody new that hasn't got a chance to introduce themselves to everybody else, it would be a really good time to say hello and just make sure we all know who you are. So maybe your name, organization, and location. So if this is your first meeting, I want to give a chance to somebody to do that. And I think Stefan.
Stefan.
Okay.
Hi, Stefan.
Hey. Do you want me to go ahead and introduce myself?
I would.
Sure. My name is Stefan Tangin. I'm a tribal resilience liaison for the North Central region. I work directly for the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance. I have an office at the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center at CU Boulder.
And he left out the part where he's rad.
Well, then we're happy to have you, only if you're rad. Okay, well, and I think everybody else has been here before. Is that right? Let me look down the list here. Not that we don't want to hear from you. Actually, if everybody would just take a moment and just, introduce yourself a little bit, just briefly in the chat, just so we all remind ourselves who's here. Kevin, you look like you might be new. Have we had you here on a meeting before? Sorry, you just walked in and put you on the spot, but would you mind introducing yourself?
Me? Sorry, my headphones were off.
Yeah, I can hear you. Would you mind just introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Kevin Coronado. I'm working with Chaz Jones from ATNI. I am a new student intern with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I'm a sophomore in college, and my major is in environmental science.
Yay, students, when you're still so young and idealistic. All right, we're thrilled to have you here. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, so we're going to do some an opportunity next for some member announcements, which is just all these people, all these great people in the room. We're going to share any announcements that are applicable and relevant to the topic we're working on. I'm going to touch base a little bit again on our shared files and just some additional inputs. And then our main focus of today is going to be a discussion with Mead Crosby. She is with the University of Washington's Climate Impacts Group, and she's going to share the tribal climate tool that they've developed. And so that's right in our lane. Super excited for everybody else who may not already be aware of this tool to look at it. And like we always do, it's not just a demo, it's going to be a discussion around what the challenges are, lessons learned, what might be next for tools like this, what are the remaining gaps. And so we'll do that in just a minute. But this is a time for some member announcements. I'm going to leave the floor open here. So anything that you've got going on that you think others on the group would benefit from knowing about, or if it advances sort of our mission or our charge together, let us know. I've got a few things.
I got something real quick, and it's that the last month, the last couple of weeks, the Status of Tribes and Climate Change report was released from the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. And I was involved in that as an author, and so was Stefan. So it's very exciting that that's finally out, and I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. And it's broken up into different chapters. So if there's a certain part that's more that you feel is more relevant to you, then you can just go straight to that. But I recommend reading the whole thing because it's awesome.
Yeah, I have been sharing that and have not yet totally read through it. And is there a big focus on data in that report, Shasta?
Not on data per se. It's more a broader overview of how climate change is affecting tribes right now. But there's also useful information about how to be involved with tribes. And so, part of that is going to be, certainly is going to be data driven.
Yeah, and that's a topic that's come up at these meetings, is that eventually when we have some solutions, or if we've identified tool providers or data providers that are not working well with tribes yet, how we might be able to help make those connections. And so resources about how to do that are things that we are trying to collect. So I actually put that report in our shared file along with the other report that came out this week from our friends and fellow members of this group, the Climate Science Alliance, who just came out with another report, Building Authentic Collaborations with Tribal Communities. And so it's a living reference for climate practitioners. So that's in our shared files as well. I'm gonna leave it open. Anybody else have any news? Even things like, hey, I heard of this grant. Anybody going for it? Or, things like that.
Yeah, I was gonna, in terms of grants, there's coping with drought, notice of funding available through NOAA-NIDIS. And we're actually going after that with a couple folks from the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance. But it's open until October, so it's a good opportunity to apply for awards.
Do you have any particular data access component to that work, or what did that look like?
So for the 4 tribes that make up the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance, Standing Rock, Flandreau Santee, Rosebud, and Oglala all work with a consulting firm called Banner, and they're out of South Dakota, and they've been working with them on their water management processes, particularly around drought. Banner did their drought adaptation plans. And so some of the data that they are trying to acquire are groundwater related to better understand how they're going to be more reliant on their aquifers as in-stream flows decrease during droughts, and what that mix might look like in the future, and trying to model out what they might be looking at in terms of water availability in future droughts. So there are many data needs around that question, and part of that proposal will be driving at trying to answer that question.
I feel like groundwater is going to be something that we keep talking about in this group. It's come up for us in California. There is like a parallel effort in California that sounds very similar to what you guys are doing that I could send to you. Just, if you're looking for other kind of best practices.
That would be great.
Anyone else?
Hey, this is Claudia. I have an update. So the CDC's Climate and Health Program has awarded its grantees for the Climate Ready States and Cities Initiative funding opportunity that came out over the summer. So I'll post a link to see, to show who those recipients are. And we have a kickoff scheduled for next week. So yeah, so that's where that stands.
Great, and y'all are continuing to fund climate ready tribes too.
Yes, we're we're staying up on that for the I think it's project year 4. So that's going along. I don't know if I haven't been keeping up with that, whether there's an update.
Paula is one of those recipients and continuing to go strong. So it's appreciated, I know, by the tribes that have received it. The other big news on the federal level with climate change and health, probably data, is the new, HHS created
Office. That's, yeah. now I can't think. It's OCCHE, I think, Office of Climate Change and Health and Equity, if I'm getting that right. And so that's under the Deputy Secretary's office. And yeah, they just had their official announcement. I can post a link to that as well. And from our team, Shibayu Saha, if anyone has worked with him before, he has been serving a detail helping to stand up that office. So we're excited to have someone helping support that. And it sounds like a great way to coordinate climate health efforts across HHS.
Yeah, that's really cool. I feel like I should try to grab somebody once it's up and running to sit on this group as well.
Yeah, and I can help make that connection if needed via Shibayu.
Yeah, I guess we'll let them get settled and figure out what their strategy is for tribes. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think definitely a pillar of, on the equity side, a pillar of that group is trying to make sure to engage the appropriate communities. So I'm sure they would be enthusiastic to be involved.
Well, thank you, Claudia. Anybody else?
Just kind of along those lines, I don't know if you're all familiar with NOAA just launched a Center for Artificial Intelligence recently. And I think like we're talking about data, I'll just put it in the chat. But that might be another group to connect with. They have quite a few people that talk through their community of practice right now, ESIP. I don't know how much they're focused on tribes, but maybe from a data perspective, they'd be helpful.
Well, thank you, Marcus. In fact, I had a conversation this past week with NOAA, but their environmental literacy department was interested in possibly weaving in some of what we're doing with our data sort of capacity building into their trainings for tribes. So, Shasta, we should talk more about that. But it's just, I bring it up because I feel like those folks, which are some folks even on the line here, working on capacity building and training for tribes, if you would like to partner up on bringing more information on data gathering to tribes, we'd be happy to sort of work with you, talk with you. And then Shasta, do you want to mention the last thing here is you forgot about your own program. You just got a third round of funding for this specific program.
What?
Yeah, we got BIA Tribal Resilience Fund, the third round for our data development work, which was what's funding this group.
Yes, we did. We got another round from BIA's Tribal Resilience Program to just keep doing this work and the other work that we're doing on being able to pull data for neighboring tribes. We started in Paula, and then we moved out to San Diego County tribes, and now we're doing Southern California tribes, and just helping people get their hands on the data they need to inform their vulnerability assessments and their adaptation plans. So we're just, it's always a thrill that BIA is still behind us in this work. So yay.
Yeah. Next up, the world. I know we keep scaling up, but the slight angle on this one is that we're not just going to look at vulnerability assessment, like folks that are in the vulnerability assessment process, but those that have evolved, they're on to adaptation work, but they're continuing to monitor their work. And so we're looking for best practices in data management in the implementation and evaluation phase. Okay, so that's
Angie?
Yes.
Sorry, can I just jump in? Tell me if this is not appropriate. It's less of an update and more of a request for an open request for feedback. I'm speaking at the end of the month at FOSFOR-G, which stands for Free and Open Source for Geospatial. And there's a specific climate resilience track that I'm speaking at. And the title of my talk is Get Closer to the Action, and the thesis statement that I'm putting forth is stop building open source tools that nobody but developers use and make yourself a little bit more useful to communities that are doing this work, and really talk to them and figure out what they need and how your skill set might be able to help them before you just build something and put it out there and pray that somebody comes and uses it. I'm wondering if anyone in this group has some positive examples of working with either open source software or an open source developer that might have done that, or has a program that might be a way for kind of these good-natured open source developers to partner with people that might need their skill sets.
So does that mean like kind of like close the deal? Like don't just create all this open source software without making sure that it actually addresses something that a community would use.
Yeah, and
Okay.
really a lot of what my thesis is really like, access to data is very, very important. And in this case, access to open source software is important, but it's not enough. You have to take it further to get across the finish line, and that line continues to move. But my point is, stop building and hoping they will come, and start talking to people and figure out what exactly they need. So if anyone has examples or best practices or even like case studies that they would like me to tout, I'm absolutely happy to do that. You can feel free to message me or email me separately. I'll put my email in the chat.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, that was great. Thank you all. All right, let's move in. Just want to sort of remind us that we have this shared document, and just to remind us all what's in there and what we might be doing with it. Let me drag it over here. And I will send a link again to it in the chat in just a moment. But here's where we sort of communicate, we're sort of tracking what we said our problem statement was, our purpose or mission statement, and then our goals and objectives. And I just think they're becoming clearer, that we're identifying key tools and solutions and evaluating their usefulness to tribes, and identifying which tools currently don't serve tribes and can't be enhanced. So that's a big one. Identify key tribal data needs and gaps. And then once we sort of have done that kind of inventorying, encourage data and tool makers to serve tribes better, and guide agencies on how to consult and engage with tribes. So that I feel like is the sort of key objectives of maybe the key goal of this group. And then where we can foster collaborative tribal resilience data access solutions. And one of the things we said we would do is outline key partners and ally coalitions. And so we have a place for all of these things. So like this document is to help us track, create these inventories of stuff we need. So obviously we still have our member directory, and all of you are in there. I use that when I'm going to look at who I want, who might be interested in speaking next. This is where we can continue to drop agencies and allies, and I have this column here for whether or not they are adjacent, their work is adjacent or duplicative, because that was a conversation we had. Meaning, like, if we come across anybody who's doing what we're doing exactly, meaning trying to collaborate around greater access to tribes for climate and health resilience data, then we would want to know that, because we don't want to butt heads, we don't want to duplicate work. And then here we are, this is a place where I think we can continuously add data gaps that we are aware of. Here's where we're sort of tracking data solutions we're aware of. And we'll definitely be adding, it's not already here. Oh, yeah, here we go. Tribal climate tool. And then other relevant resources. And, I'm dropping links as they come across. I have to fill out the rest of this section. But so, just know we're sort of inventorying, and I think we ought to try to really focus the group's energy on one particular maybe tab at a time. And we'll talk about that towards the end. Are there any questions on this? I bring it up because I feel like we are moving in the right direction, and giving ourselves the ability to sort of grab, compile information across all these members. Okay. So let's move on to the meat of things. So I would like to welcome Meet Crosby from the University of Washington, who I met several years ago because she had this wonderful tool, and I try to point people to this tool when we do trainings, and I use it as an example all over the place. It's the Tribal Climate Tool, and I'm just going to let Mead give you an overview of it. She's going to spend about 10 minutes giving you an overview, and then we're going to have a whole discussion. Okay, so Mead, I am going to make you a co-presenter, or make you co-host, and you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Let me see. Sorry, I just got a new laptop and I hadn't realized that my screen sharing wasn't yet allowed. There we go. Will that work? Let's try it a different way.
If you have trouble, I can always go to your website and you can kind of walk people around. I can share my screen.
I can do that. I did have a presentation talk about how we made the tool, so I was hoping to be able to do that.
Yeah, you can email that to me too if you want. Darn technology.
Yeah, it's kind of inevitable, I guess. All right, well, not ideal. Let me send you the, well, maybe the thing to do is just have you go to the tool and demo it, because I can't seem to get my computer to share my screen on this new computer.
That's happy to.
Unfortunate.
Right now. Do you want to maybe, while I do that, you could just kind of start talking about how you developed it.
Yep. Sorry, I'm still trying to get it to share, but I guess it will not. All right. Well, that's a bummer. So, okay. I'm going to talk today about the development of the tribal climate tool, which was a project that was sponsored by the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center and the Great Basin Landscape Conservation Cooperative to provide some of the, or try to fill some of the technical gaps that some tribes in the Northwestern Great Basin were facing in preparing for climate change, particularly around conducting risk assessments and having easy access to some of the Western climate science that could help predict the kinds of impacts they may be facing to their natural and cultural resources so that they could better prepare for those impacts. If you could scroll down and go to the right,
yeah,
and click use the tool. Okay, so,
go back, okay.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, guys. This is way less than ideal, but so before we start, I just wanted to give some background on the tool, which is that it was co-produced with tribes, and we did that in a number of ways. We had a tribal advisory group that filled a really important leadership role in the development of the tool that included folks from affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, Snake River Tribes, Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, and a number of different, Bureau of Indian Affairs, a number of Indigenous scholars, tribes and tribal associations. We worked both with the tribal advisory group and with staff and tribal members from across the Northwest and the Great Basin to design the tool, to test the tool, to train folks in using the tool. One of the things that we noticed in developing the tool, and I should say that this is relevant to a point made a moment ago by Jessica, which is that the tool was developed in response to an identified need. So there was a survey done of Columbia Basin tribes by Don Sampson from Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians to identify the barriers to climate adaptation in those tribes. And again, this technical capacity, the difficulty in accessing, interpreting, and applying Western climate science, particularly like locally relevant, tribally relevant information, that was identified as a significant barrier by many of the tribes. And so the tribal climate tool was developed to fill that gap. It was to make information from Western science on climate impacts really easily accessible and tailored to tribal needs, both around the impacts of concern to tribes and also over the areas of concern to tribes geographically. So when we started, the only information that was available to tribes was by reservation. So that was the only geographic area over which tribes could look at potential impacts. And it was only a few simple variables like annual change in precipitation, annual change in temperature. And that's not the kind of locally relevant, tribally relevant information that actually is really helpful for adaptation. We started by doing a survey of all the tribes in Northwest and Great Basin, asking about what their concerns were around climate change. And no, we did not ask what data they wanted. We asked what their concerns were, because often we find working with all kinds of natural resource managers, you'll better be able to curate information by asking what the concern is, not what information folks want. And so the tribes identified a wide range of impacts of concern, highest of which was impacts on individual species, vegetation, animal species, habitats. But it went from everything from stream flow, stream temperature, snowpack, extreme heat, you name it. It kind of crossed all the different impacts you might consider. We also asked them over what areas they make decisions around planning, natural resource planning, cultural resource planning, and climate adaptation planning. And again, there was no one answer. In fact, most tribes listed of equal importance a number of different geographic areas, including things like reservations, but also different sized basins, usual and protected areas for tribes here in Washington, traditional territories, and some really unique things that we wouldn't have considered, like everything west of this line in this valley or things like that. And so these were very custom concerns that tribes had over which they were making decisions. And so we recognized from that there was no one size fits all for creating a tool, that we couldn't just do it by reservation or by a particular size basin, that we actually had to ask the tribes individually what information they needed. And so we sent letters to all 84 tribes in the Northwest and Great Basin. We've sent them to the tribal chairs. We CC'd the environmental directors, and we asked them over what areas would you like to have this tool give you tailored climate information. And we told them what the tool would do. We told them it would be public. Please don't send us sensitive information. You can change your mind at any time. And so that was also a way to obtain free, prior, and informed consent for the use of tribal information here, geographic areas. And ultimately, we got custom geography requests from, I can't remember the exact number, but out of the 84, it's something like 60. It's a high number. And we provided, as a default for all tribes, their reservations. So we gave them you could select 3 custom geographies and your reservation. So some tribes have up to 4 geographies on the tool. Those tribes who didn't respond still can look at their reservation if they have one. Okay, so now if you could select a tribe, and why don't you go down to Yakima? So it'll be Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakima Nation. Up a little bit more there. Yeah, you can take a tour if you want. We're not going to take the tour right now, but so scroll up, please. So the way that it's organized is you can select your tribe in the drop down on the left there, and then if you click on area of interest, there's a drop down menu. And so the Yakima, for example, provided 3 different areas of concern, and their reservation is also included. So some of these, like their ceded lands, are huge. It spans kind of the whole Cascade Crest up to the border almost, whereas the reservation is much smaller. And so you'll get quite different information depending on what you're looking at for which geographic area you're reviewing. And tribes make different decisions at different scales. And so this is helpful. So if you want to go, sure, you can pick the sub basin. So the area outlined in black there is the Yakima Sub Basin. That was one of the areas of concern for the tribe. You can then choose whether you want to see results as a map or graph. You can change that anytime. Why don't you go to map? And then if you scroll down just a little bit on the left here, go to climate related variable. You can choose what climate metric or variable you want to look at. There's about 20. And these were very carefully curated based on survey results and based on talking to tribal staff and members and our advisory group to reflect as concisely as possible. So we didn't want to overwhelm people with data. We wanted to provide the most useful data in an amount that wouldn't be overwhelming, but that represented the best available science as we saw it. And so if you scroll up to the top. These range from precipitation, but not just annual, also seasonal, which makes a big difference, at least here in the Northwest and Great Basin. It includes temperature, but again, not just annual, also things like extreme heat days. We have snowpack, like early spring snowpack, late spring snowpack. You scroll down a little bit. Soil moisture, stream temperature, summer and winter stream flow, some information around how vegetation composition might change, heat accumulation information and growing season, and scroll down. And fire risk, so we have very high fire danger days and extreme fire danger days, and then sea level. So why don't we pick one of these? So can you scroll up? Why don't we look at, how about stream temperature, which might draw a little bit slowly, we'll see. This is one of the most data intensive of the layers that we have in here. It's a fairly large basin. Okay, so right now what you're looking at is average August stream temperature for the Yakima Sub Basin. You can look at it in degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius, so you have a choice. And you can also look, if you look at time period there on the left, you can select, it depends on the data, which time periods you can select. Some are only available for certain time horizons, but here we're looking at end of century. And the reason, one of the primary reasons this is of importance to tribes in the Northwest is for salmon. And so if you scroll down, you can see there are some check boxes there. So you can look, you can select you can get rid of certain temperatures if you don't want to, if you just want to select, for example, cold streams for in the summer in the Northwest for the end of the century. For example, if you're looking for cold water refugia for cold water fish, or if you want to see which streams are going to exceed salmon's, like the mortality threshold for salmon, for example, in August, you can click just to see those streams so that you can think about how you might mitigate those impacts or what decisions you might make to help them get around thermal barriers at the end of the century. So you can make, allowing these to click on and off is really helpful just for certain decisions folks might be making around climate adaptation for things like salmon or other cold water fish by the end of the century. And if you go up and look to the right, we also provide the data in a couple different ways. We provide as simple as we could sort of text narrative description of what you're seeing in the map. But then there's also a table. Yeah. So then there's also a summary table that is another way of describing the data. So this is like what percent of streams fall within these different temperature ranges by the end of the century. And then if you go all the way to the left, you can also look at this not as a map, but as a graph. Can you scroll up a little bit and go to the left and click on graph? Yeah, so you can also see how the distribution of stream temperatures changes over time under a high emission scenario, or this is a moderate emission scenario. You can change the emission scenario. So this kind of information, this is line data. There's a lot of raster data. There's some point data, for example, for stream flows. I don't know how much time I have to walk through some of the other kinds of data. But one other thing that I would like to show folks is that you can also, so see the hamburger on the top right of the, so go to the left and go to the right. There's a little hamburger on the top right of the figure, in the figure. Yeah, you can download any of the graphics from here. You can download any of the figures, any of the maps, you can download the data. And you can also create a summary report. And where is that again?
Right here.
Thank you. So you can create a summary report where you can choose whatever climate metrics you want it to spit out, whatever time periods, whatever emission scenarios. And it'll, if you go to, go up to the top, and go to download, if you don't mind showing what it looks like. This will be this will be busy because it's got all of them in there. But yeah, do you want to click on it and just open it real quick? Right, so then it creates a summary report for folks with all of the information for whatever metrics you select so that you can get that information really easily. And then also, if you want to go back in to the tool real fast, I think I want to go to the left one. So if you go up, go back, please. There you go, and go up to the top right. So there's a few things on the top right too. So documentation, there's a lot of different information about the data that is in the tool. What are the data sources? Where do they come from? How can you read more about them? Information on how to cite the tool. And then also on there's a tour, which will walk you through the whole thing. And there's a lot of different little help buttons, all the little question marks you see around there, little help buttons to help you understand what is in each of these options. But if you go to tribal resources on the right, there is an accompanying website that provides context for using the tool. So if you scroll down, the website is designed, or we have a help desk that accompanied the tool. It's still open if anyone wants to call, but there's a help desk, and the help desk really helped us design this website by to address the range of questions that we received from tribal staff and members around assessing climate risks. And so this website is designed to mirror the range of questions we got from how is the climate changing, and this puts into context the climate tool, to how, can you scroll up for a moment? Thank you. To how can tribes assess their climate vulnerability? And so there's examples, scroll down please. Thank you. So if you click on, for example, if you want to click on any one of those boxes, or if a tribe wants to take a more indigenous approach that doesn't use much Western science, there are examples of guides and resources for doing that. There are examples from tribes who have taken a more traditional approach to their vulnerability assessments and adaptation plans, and you can open those up. And any of these boxes open up and you can take a deeper and deeper dive. So go back, please. And then how can tribes engage their communities, youth, and governments in these assessments? And then finally, how can you use, fund, and get support for these assessments so that people aren't just producing assessments that do not lead to adaptation and implementation? So all of these are supposed to, the project really was three-pronged. Around providing that, filling that data gap with the tool, providing support for assessments themselves with this website, and then also having this technical support desk to field any questions anyone has about any of the above. And that remains open. We also did a series of workshops once these were all developed. We held workshops throughout the Northwest and Great Basin, and everyone brought a laptop or we provided one, and we trained folks hands-on in using the tool. And that ranged from tribal youth to elders and council members to tribal staff, which could include folks with like PhDs and geospatial analysis, or not. And so it was just like huge range. And so we got a lot of really useful information about how to improve the tool so everyone could use it. And also provide training in how to use it through those workshops. And the desk remains open for any more questions. As far as next steps, there aren't any immediate next steps. There's been a lot of back and forth about the potential for making it go national, for example, through the CASCs, the Climate Adaptation Science Centers, and through other efforts. But as yet, we haven't. It just hasn't happened. It would be a huge lift, and the question of where to get the capacity for that lift. It's not just a technical problem. You really need, like, to get those those custom geographies. We there were literally hundreds of phone calls back and forth. We sent the letter and we followed up with a phone call. And then, some tribes, there might have been like 20 phone calls, and then some just 1 or 2 or none, right? Some got the letter, they sent us, the geography is done. But many had questions, and there was a lot of back and forth to build those relationships and trust. And so it's not a light lift, I think, to do it right. And so figuring out where to get the capacity to do that, in addition to then all that work to figure out what are the important impacts in any given region, which will be different region to region. The data you would want to use would be different region to region. You'd have to do the training region to region. So it's not as simple as just punching a bunch of numbers to take it national. To do it right and co-produce it right and have that shared ownership by the tribes, which we really did here in the Northwest and Great Basin. And it's the proof of that is in its use. It's been used by many different tribes now. It's in a number of vulnerability assessments, adaptation plans. It's been used in ways we never expected. It's been used in curriculum in tribal colleges for GIS training. It's wound up in like textbooks for this stuff. It's been used by non-tribal entities. We've seen counties use it because they had an overlap in geography with a tribe and they didn't have this data. So there's a huge interest in this kind of tool, but it's still a pretty big lift to take it to a larger scale. So we'll see if that happens.
Pete, you're amazing, and I do wish you could just serve the whole country. Let's go find you a grant. But we talked before about community ready data, and I feel like you guys are very far along on the spectrum of doing that, even so far as to create a report. What in your mind are you hearing from tribes? Like, what else is left for them to do? Are there other things, if you could snap your fingers and it was easy to do, that you would lift off of them in terms of like the remaining work that they have to do to complete a vulnerability assessment?
Oh, to complete a vulnerability assessment. Well, that's a whole, so we tried to provide a number of options in there for how you could take those next steps. And I think, the best we can do, or we try to do, is just provide, again, highly curated key resources like guidebooks for, taking the next steps, and making it really clear to folks that it doesn't have to be, and in fact, it's probably not best to bring in like an academic consultant to do your vulnerability assessment for you, but you can in fact do it just with community members, and here's some worksheets, and we can talk, your land, your resources better than anybody. Here are some options for, bringing in the Western science or not. There's like the indigenous health indicators. There's really cool, more traditional ways of doing this work that may not require or really benefit from any outside help or really heavy lift on Western science. So I guess my only answer would be that I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think every tribe is different in terms of the approach they would want to take and their capacity to do an assessment. So I feel like the most useful thing in my mind is having climate service providers available to help act as a sounding board and being available for technical assistance, so that tribes don't feel like you have to go get an outside consultant to do this, because I think that doesn't always build the capacity that is really required. It doesn't necessarily make the best use of the local and traditional knowledge. So yeah, this whole project was kind of a way to, like any given tribe could pay a group like mine, tens of thousands of dollars to provide the data that's in that tool. And now it's available for 84 tribes. They don't have to pay us. So it's a way to like put ourselves out of business in that area. And I think that's kind of the goal.
Yep. Yes. So Stefan, wait, did I say that right this time, Stefan? He has a question.
Yeah, you did. Thanks.
Okay.
Hey, Mead, I have seen this presentation multiple times and I'm always impressed by it. So I appreciate the work that you did. And I had a question specific to the comments you made about scaling up to cover other regions in light of how much money may come to some of these efforts, particularly around the casks and more increasing the work that casks do with tribal nations? Do you see this as being a high priority? Is this something that you're pushing for to be expanded? This is a conversation that we had 2 years ago in our cask in the North Central, and ultimately we felt like we were not in a place that we were ready to make that investment, but clearly we're in a much different place now. So yeah, just curious about what you're thinking in terms of that strategy.
I mean, my general sort of philosophy about it is I'm not pushing for anything. I'm here as a resource if anybody wants to do this, if the tribes want it. But I mean, personally, I don't even have the capacity right now I in an ideal world, $1 gazillion would fall from the sky. A tribal member who who does this work wants to take this on and lead it, and I'm happy to provide technical support to it as needed. But I'm not pushing for it to be done. I know that there's been demand for it, but I think in an ideal world it would be very well resourced and tribally led.
We also have a question from Marcus.
Hey, also, yeah, thanks, Mead. Great presentation. I wanted to kind of hone in on the action piece and like the outcomes piece. And I work mostly on water issues. And I'm just thinking about like how specifically your resource layer around stream flows could link into tribal water rights and anti-degradation law under the Clean Water Act. So I'm just like curious about how, like, do you track implementation of like these plans and like, because there's a lot that could be done there too, right?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I haven't been tracking implementation of plans that have used the tool at all. I've been really, I mean, basically I just go on Google once in a while and, Google up tribal climate tool and see how it's, who's using it and how. So that's a really limited sort of evaluation of the use of the tool. I've never tried to then see what's been done after that, but that would be pretty fascinating. I hope it's being used in ways like that. It always makes me really happy when it's used in ways I would never have anticipated. So if you hear anything about that, let me know.
Yeah, no, just curious. It'll be interesting to do like a program evaluation too, right? And just like do a post reach out.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah, and that's the tricky thing, right? Projects like this was a 2-year grant and they end. And there's no money for evaluation of these once they're over. And so it would be great to do some better, a more rigorous evaluation of it. And even that would take some funding to have a well-designed survey, for example, or interviews. And yeah, I'm sure like all of you, everything is kind of hitting the fan right now in terms of demand. And so it's really hard there's all these things that we would like to do to follow up on previous projects, but right now we're being bombarded with, which is not a bad thing, with work on adaptation. So.
Yeah, certainly a lot of need. That project that Shasta and I were talking about, its focus in California, we are going to be doing a questionnaire similar in ways to what you were talking about, trying to understand from tribes where their data gaps and needs truly are and some of the parameters that they may be needing information. I'd be interested if you wouldn't mind sharing that questionnaire, and then just maybe there's some follow-up discussion. I think there's opportunity to kind of bring some of your best practices potentially into at least into California.
Yeah, so this is good reminder I am trying to write up a paper that describes the tool and the best practices and how it's being used. And that would be as a resource. I don't have anything other than these kinds of presentations that kind of lay out the practices that we use, which I will say we're totally indebted to the tribal advisory group. I mean, it was really, it was a real privilege to be able to implement so many of these best practices that were very cutting edge at the time, which is a few years ago, especially among universities doing this kind of work. Writing the letters, going in through the front door, getting through prior and informed consent, all of that was really the tribal advisory group just being way ahead of it of, okay, these are the things we need to do it right. So I think this is a good nudge to try to capture some of that. I think especially for, I'm interested that you think that would be useful in California. I feel like in general for academics, especially, that's just not at all a practice that's known or followed widely. So I should write a quick one pager and put it on the tool website.
Well, at the very least, all the location options is really interesting, and that's a big gap in California where we have lots of really good tools, but creating boundaries that are meaningful to tribes is not done well by even the best of the tools. CalVirus, CalAdapt, and so I was just, that would be a way to nudge some agencies maybe in those directions. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot we could talk about. Does anybody else have questions for Mead? I have one more.
Hey, this is Claudia. I have a quick one. Thanks for the presentation. I am exploring it right now. And I'm curious because, I work closely with tracking, the Environmental Public Health Tracking Program and their Data Explorer, and they're always working on county, or if they're lucky, census tract level. So I'm curious, so these areas that are defined, is there a lot of variability between whether it's a really large area or a relatively small, and how does that compare to like the census tract level that's so often used in these types of tools?
I don't know. I don't feel like I'm trying to picture the size of the census tract, and I actually am not super familiar with how big those are. So all I can say is that the sizes are fairly variable within a tribe and across tribes in the tool. And that can, at least in the West, in the Northwest and the Great Basin, that can make even not even that big a difference in size can make a really big difference in the kinds of impacts you see. For example, whether there is snowpack or not, and how that influences what's happening in a region versus a smaller region. And so they are fairly variable, and it does make a difference in the results that you get. Although I will say that for some of the smallest geographies, it is almost so small as to need some additional guidance around interpretation, because there are some reservations that are in California, especially, I think, that are very small, and it's sort of questionable whether you should be making sort of spatial like summarizing change over such a like, what does it mean meaningfully from a climatology perspective, be summarizing change over such a spatially small area. But that's not generally true. That's I can think of just a couple examples where it really was just like almost pixel level.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's making me think about, ways to be more adaptable in the sizes and that we're presenting information to. Yeah, appreciate that, and the amount of intentionality you guys put in that aspect of this.
Yeah, and I'm happy to follow up on Claudia, because I really feel like CDC does such a good job. I always go to CDC amongst a lot of other data sources to look at impacts. So not just exposure level data, what climate conditions are happening, how is that affecting the climate conditions in a particular community. But then for you, Mead, how are you guys thinking about the next step, sort of like the next layer down? So moving from exposure level data to what I consider impact level data, so that people don't have to make the inferences themselves. So and that's what we try to do with the EASY tool. We're looking at the research and looking for data sources and say, well, not only, it may be like in your case, the stream flow is this, but what does that mean for stream? What does that mean for salmon?
So we thought about how we might do that, but it would, the amount of work because again, it's not the same for every tribe. The targets could be different. They're not all concerned about the same species. They're not all concerned about the same resources. And so it would it would just be so difficult. And also even, I guess you could do it from a purely Western science perspective and offer that up, but you know, in doing a vulnerability assessment, so much of it, if it's going to be good, is local knowledge that could include Indigenous knowledge. And so when I'm thinking of impact, I'm really, I guess maybe you're taking a step back, so I'm thinking of vulnerability, like risk, and then it's you really need all that sensitivity information, which a lot of that's going to be local, and you know, the adaptive capacity information, and so the exposures is such a tiny part of that,
Right.
that it would be just such a huge amount of work to get the sensitivity right, get the adaptive capacity right, because it requires local knowledge. So the one place I'll say that it was frustrating to not have, maybe what's getting closer to what you're asking for us in natural resources, would be that what the tribes wanted most of all is what we couldn't deliver, which is information on individual species. And we couldn't do that for many different reasons, primary of which is that there's just not that information readily available for most species around vulnerability. So
yep.
It's just, and especially around when you get to first foods, like roots, you know, like a lot of that stuff, there's just not Western science available on it. So it was a real limitation. That's what folks wanted most, and it's what we couldn't really provide. Though some folks have taken a crack at, you know, a certain assemblages of species, but it's just, we couldn't do it at this scale.
Yeah. This is the pickle, and really the reason why this group exists is just there's just a lot of information that needs to go into making these kinds of decisions, and there's probably a way to get some of it to be more accessible, right? And so finding the solutions for that is sort of what we're focused on. We are out of time. I want to say a big thank you to Mead and for those of you that participated in this conversation, good questions, good discussion. And I just want to invite anybody over email to send me anything, any suggestions for future agendas or speakers. And what I do want to do as a follow-up, I think we ought to try as a group to tackle one of these inventories. And I really think we ought to first maybe tackle the allies and potential duplicating initiatives first. So I will send that over in an email. Any last final remarks from anybody before we hop off? Okay. All right. Thank you all. Thanks again to me.
Thank you guys. Good seeing you.